Africa generates a low share of global carbon emissions, yet the continent is highly vulnerable to climate change. Global warming and heat stress will lead to the loss of nearly 5% of total working hours in Western Africa alone, equivalent to the loss of 9 million full-time jobs. Climate vulnerability could also reduce yields from rain-fed agriculture, affecting millions of jobs and livelihoods. Yet Africa has all the elements to win the battle against climate change. It has minerals such as lithium, nickel, cobalt, copper, and iron needed for electric vehicles and machinery, with the potential to generate some 2 million additional jobs. Africa is home to the world's second largest rainforest, the Congo Basin, which absorbs significant amounts of global carbon dioxide emissions caused by human activity. It possesses 60% of the world's arable land, which could drive a new green, sustainable agriculture revolution. Africa has the Great Green Wall, the world's largest solar power station in the Moroccan desert, and the potential to use its ocean resources for sustainable economic development. With assets like these, Africa can have a more sustainable future with more and better jobs. But there are challenges ahead. Africa is a leading producer of oil, coal, and natural gas, but it needs to end its dependence on fossil fuels, which could lead to the loss of around 2 million jobs. To become more sustainable, there needs to be massive economic and social restructuring. Countries need to adopt clear and comprehensive policies that address income and job losses, skills and enterprise development, and labor mobility based on the foundation laid by the African Union Agenda 2063 and the ILO's Abidjan Declaration, which commits to sustainable growth, decent job creation, and investment in the institution of work to achieve a human-centered future of work in Africa. With its young and dynamic population, vast natural resources, and political and social engagement, Africa offers solutions to the world. Working together, governments, workers, and employers' organizations can jumpstart a just transition to a sustainable future. Today.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from, and a massive welcome to the regional launch of the Climate Action for Jobs initiative, as well as the social dimension of the Ecological Transition Project. My name is Nozi Poshavalala, and it is an absolute pleasure to serve you as the moderator of this very important conversation. Allow me to also welcome you to a celebration of Earth Day as we pause around the world to really bring front and center some of the issues that we've just heard on that context-setting video that we need to respond to. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before I proceed any further, allow me to invite you to please make use of our interpretation services. If you'd like to engage in this conversation in French or Spanish, all you need to do is to go to the bottom of your screen, choose the interpretation icon, and you will be able to hear this conversation in English, in French, as well as in Spanish. Now, before we get further, allow us maybe to take a moment to pause and go back to the genesis of what brings us to this all-important moment. Allow us to recall that in 2015, the governing body of the International Labour Organization adopted a set of guidelines for a just transition towards environmentally sustainable economies and societies. And fast forward to 2019 at the Climate Action Summit that was convened by the United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, where we saw 46 countries committing to a just ecological transition. And so thereby putting at the very center jobs and livelihoods as we all journey towards what we say we want, which is a greener future. And so to turn this framework into concrete action, the UN Secretary General and the DG of the ILO, alongside leaders from government, leaders from workers' organizations, leaders from employer organizations, together launched the Climate Action for Jobs initiative. And so it's within this moment and this agenda and this opportunity that today We are also going to be looking at the project, which is the social dimension of the ecological transition that was birthed out of this vision that we could and can see a just ecological transition. And so, ladies and gentlemen, over the next 2 hours, we're going to hear from our regional director and assistant director general for Africa, alongside members of the board of the Climate Action for Jobs initiative. We're going to be leaning into their opening remarks and their statements that they're going to be sharing at this regional launch and this really critical moment for the African continent. But we're also we're going to be tapping into two very important questions, and we're going to be using a panel discussion to respond to each of these questions. The first one is really understanding what are the needs and the priorities in meeting countries' just transition commitments. So we know that countries have stepped up, they have articulated their just transition commitments. We now need to pause and have a conversation about what are those needs, what are the priorities, and how do we best support countries to move towards that reality. The second big question that we have to answer today is, how do we then actualize these just transition opportunities in Africa? How do we unlock these opportunities? How do we make them come alive? And so we're going to have a very practical conversation about how we might do exactly that. As we get started, allow me to also invite you to do a couple of things. The first one is to help us amplify this conversation on social media. We are using two hashtags. We're using hashtag ILO Green Week, hashtag ILO Green Week as one of our hashtags, and hashtag Earth Day. So please use these hashtags as you share what you're hearing, the insights, the snippets, the sound bites in these conversations, so we can really bring the world's attention to this conversation. The last invitation from me is to ask you to use your voice in this conversation. We're going to be taking in your questions and your comments, so please feel free to use the chat functionality, and I will try to the best of my ability to integrate your voice into the conversation. Right, I think I've been speaking for too long now. Let's get right into it. It's my absolute pleasure for now for us to transition into our opening session. I'm going to hand over the virtual stage to the ILO Assistant Director General, of course, our Regional Director for Africa, Madame Cynthia Samuel Olojuwon, who's already on the screen. And so, Madame, thank you very much for being here with us, and of course, for opening up this regional launch. It's over to you.
Thank you very much, Moderator, Madame Nozipo Shabalala, Honorable Ministers, representatives of workers and employers organizations. I particularly want to express our appreciation to Sharon Barrow and Roberto Suarez Santos, who are with us. Members of the International Advisory Board on the Climate Action for Jobs, dear colleagues, development partners, and friends. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused a massive global disruption, and Africa is not immune from it. Not less than 9.4% of labor income was lost in 2020 due to working hour losses in Africa. The crisis has brought to the fore the intrinsic interactions that exist between a safe and productive workforce, health, and sustainable environment. It has also revealed how vulnerable our current economic and social systems are. But it's also an important wake-up call on the critical need for economies and societies to become more resilient to global disruptions, including the looming crisis of climate change. Climate change affects all of us through slow onset events such as increasing temperatures, desertification, sea level rises, and ocean acidification. It also comes with a higher frequency and intensity of climate-induced natural disasters such as storms, floods, and forest fires. African countries are highly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change, including damage to infrastructure, interruption of businesses, loss of jobs and livelihoods. We must be more resilient and we must be well prepared. However, resilience does not come by default. It must be guided by sound knowledge, constructed through coherent policies, and grounded on strong social consensus. That is why we're here today, to marry ambitious climate action with the creation of decent work and a just transition for all in Africa. The good news is that Africa is not starting from scratch. The AU Agenda 2063 provides us with a commitment by African countries to develop strategies to grow the African blue/ocean economies and the green economy. It tells us clearly that Africa does not have to make a choice between environmental sustainability on the one hand and inclusive and sustainable economic growth and decent jobs on the other. In addition, the Abidjan Declaration adopted by ILO constituents in 2019 places the promotion of growth towards a green economy, harnessing decent work in the blue economy in Africa's island states, and a just transition for all as key priorities. As we work towards the ambitious climate action while being mindful of jobs, let us be clear on the linkages between the world of work and the environment. Some 1.2 billion jobs, or 42% of total world employment, most of which are in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, depend directly on ecosystem services. And jobs everywhere are dependent on a stable environment. An estimated 59% of the jobs in Africa rely on ecosystem services. Therefore, taking decisive action to adapt to climate change and contribute to its mitigation can yield a significant potential to create more and better jobs, particularly through sustainable agriculture, green industries, and a sustainable energy transition. However, we must not overlook the profound implications that such a transformation will have on enterprises, on workers, and on communities. Winning the battle against climate change while advancing social justice and promoting decent work opportunities requires several ingredients. There is an urgent need for skilling, reskilling, and upskilling. There is indeed a very urgent need to put African young people and women as agents of change to drive transformation and green job creation. Social protection systems that go hand in hand with climate change policies will be essential to ensure that no one is left behind. Social dialogue will be an indispensable tool to forge the highly needed strong social consensus. As already referenced by the moderator, the ILO guidelines for a just transition towards environmentally sustainable economies and societies for all, adopted in 2015 through tripartite consensus, offers us a sound basis for action. We must ensure that job and income gains are maximized, the risk of job and income losses are offset, and that vulnerable people are protected. I'm therefore pleased to launch the Climate Action for Jobs initiative in Africa, as well as to kick off the project on the social dimension of the ecological transition. This new project, funded under the framework of the ILO France partnership, will enable us to build on previous work on green jobs and just transitions in countries like Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, and Ghana, and to move towards the development and implementation of national plans for just transitions. It will start in 3 pilot countries, namely Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria, and Senegal, but with a diffusion of the experience and learnings to 4 countries, Algeria, Ghana, Morocco, and Niger. Honorable ministers, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, 11 African countries have made a firm commitment to place jobs and livelihoods at the center of ambitious climate action. It's my pleasure and delight to welcome Zimbabwe as the most recent country to make such a commitment, now joining Algeria, Benin, Cabo Verde, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Guinea, Mali, Morocco, Nigeria, and Senegal. I use this platform to invite other African countries to join us in the global coalition of 50 countries that have already made such commitments. I want to emphasize that the ILO, working with other agencies in the UN system, regional development banks, multilateral and bilateral development partners, stands very ready to work with countries to support their efforts. It's encouraging to note that several African countries have already included or plan to include just transition and decent work creation in their enhanced national determined contributions on climate change, including Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Nigeria, and Zimbabwe. And as I end, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the ILO is working very closely with governments and social partners to support the development of green jobs national strategies, while Tanzania and Ghana are being supported to develop intervention models and strategies following the ILO guidelines on just transitions in the framework of the ILO CEDA partnership. In doing so, we look forward to maintaining your full tripartite and national ownership and leadership in the process. I'd like to express our appreciation to all the development partners who have joined us to work with African countries to take up these two key challenges that define our times: the challenge of fighting climate change and the challenge of securing a decent work for all so that we can achieve the SDGs. I'm inviting all other partners to join us to carry forward this very important task and translate the commitments that have been made at global and continental fora into concrete actions and results, including through funding partnerships. It's a major challenge. However, as one of Africa's icons, our very own Tata Madiba, Nelson Mandela, said, "It always seems impossible until it is done." So let us work together and make this possible. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much to you, Madam Samuel Olojuwon. Of course, thanking you very much for opening up the scene and the conversation and really opening up the launch of this particularly important conversation. You've raised a couple of important things. I want to start off where you ended off, which is of course reminding us of words of Datu Madiba, that it always seems impossible until it's done. And you do that reminding us while also saying that resilience does not come as a default. We have to be deliberate about resilience. We have to take decisive action. We've got to make sure that we're deliberate about inclusion, that we're not leaving anybody behind, that we're putting women and children at the center of all that we do as we rethink of our policies, how we make them sharper. How do they bring us closer to these two big challenges of climate action and the creation of these jobs? As I close on some of these thoughts of the regional director, I think it's also important to acknowledge how she balanced both the opportunities that are alive in Africa, but also the risks that are inherent and could have the effect of holding us back. Thank you very much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to bear with me as I might exercise some of my moderator superpowers from time to time as I make sure that we're giving the floor to each and every one of our speakers on our agenda. And I maybe want to start off by extending an invitation to our Honorable Minister of Employment and Labor Relations in Ghana, Minister Ignatius Babo Awa, and just to confirm that up until this moment, I was not seeing the minister, but I am seeing the minister on now. So thank you very much. So ladies and gentlemen, I hand you over now to our Honorable Minister in Ghana as he now takes the virtual stage and extends his thoughts and his remarks at this very important milestone. Honorable Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sharon. Colleague member of the International Advisory Board, colleague ministers, reps of organized labor, reps of employers, reps of the EU, invited guests, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It's morning here, so let me say good morning to you all. As a member of the International Advisory Board for the Climate Action for Jobs Initiative, I feel very excited to join my colleagues in the regional launch of the initiative. Doing so on an Earth Day is more apt, and I want to congratulate the organizers for the launch this morning. According to the historical emission context published by our worldindata.org, Africa's contribution to the global cumulative emission from 1751 to 2017 stands at 3%. This is much more lower compared to that of the United States of America, which is around 24%, Europe 33%, the European Union 22%, China 12.7%, Russia 6%, many others. In spite of this fact, it is so very important to ensure that we guide Africa's industrialization path so that we do not follow the trend of the already developed continent, so that we also emit high levels of contribute to the rising global warming. As Africa aspires to industrialize and to achieve significant improvement in per capita income and standards of living, it is our responsibility to adopt sustainable and innovative technologies that do not pollute or degrade the environment for current and future generations. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as of April 2017, 33 countries in Africa, including Ghana, Benin, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Chad, Ethiopia, Gabon, Gambia, Kenya, Nigeria, Somalia, Tunisia, Uganda, and Zambia had ratified the Paris Agreement on climate change. This is a strong indication that Africa wants an industrialized future which is sustainable and environmentally friendly. We are also conscious of the need to ensure that the transition to an environmentally sustainable future is just for all. In trying to bring Africa along in our quest to ensure that we reduce global warming, Ghana as a country is playing its part, and efforts have been put in place to facilitate the operationalization of the Paris Agreement on climate change. This includes the implementation of Ghana's nationally determined contributions since 2016. This comprises of 31 climate mitigation and adaptation measures in the key sectors of the economy of Ghana. However, evaluations of the measures indicate some negative impacts on the labor markets, which includes redundancies, change in skills and expertise, as well as job losses. Ladies and gentlemen, in line with ILO's guidelines for a just transition towards environmentally sustainable economies and societies for all, and national development objectives, the government of Ghana is implementing measures to address the negative impact of climate change measures and to take full advantage of emerging green sectors for decent job creation. With the support of the ILO, Ghana has developed a national green job strategy aimed at supporting the creation of green jobs through the promotion of green enterprise development and decent work. The strategy focuses on improving institutional capacity for effective coordination of sectorial interventions, development of green skills, promotion of green enterprise development, and mobilization of financial resources. It is designed to facilitate the transition to a green economy whilst creating decent jobs. Madam Moderator, colleagues, the objectives of the Ghana National Green Job Strategy, as well as aligned to the expectation of the Climate Actions for Job initiative and the social dimension of ecological transition project, and Ghana looks forward to collaborations with partners at the global, regional, and national level for effective implementation. We need to strengthen partnerships, collaborations, and cooperations among social partners, academia, advocacy groups, development partners at all levels to ensure operationalization of the strategies and achievement of the expected results. This is why I'm excited to participate in the launch of the CA4J initiatives and the social dimensions of ecological transition projects. I believe when we work in partnership and cooperation, we stand a better chance of achieving the sustainable future that we are all looking for. But before I sign off, let me, as I indicated earlier on, we couldn't have waited further by not launching this project. So it's being launched today is perhaps the biggest gift we can give to our continent. Issues of climate change are real. The need for countries to adapt to climate change is something which cannot be questioned. And actions towards mitigating the effects of climate change cannot be delayed. It is now or never. So I want to urge all my colleagues to take issues of this as serious than perhaps any other thing that may preoccupy our discussions in the years to come. Climate change effect on jobs is so real. Africa must be a partner in the global struggle to make sure that at least we survive in the next generation by making sure that we keep emission levels within checks. On this note, I want to say that I'm grateful to you for listening to me. Thank you.
Honorable Minister, thank you very much to your contribution to this regional launch. And as you leave us with so much to think about, you talk and put on the table a challenge for us to really collaborate and partner so that the strategies that we build do not die on paper and indeed are brought alive in various key strategic sectors. You also speak about the challenge of ensuring that all that we do is aligned to our national development agendas and plans so that we are indeed all pulling in the same direction and that we might have the courage to unlock the opportunities in some of the emerging green sectors. Thank you very much for also highlighting that this conversation is a gift to the continent. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to invite now the president of the High Council of Social Dialogue from Senegal. It is my pleasure to invite onto the virtual stage, Madame Innocence Ndiaye, who is standing by to also share her remarks with us. So Madame, if you are with us, if you could unlock your camera and allow us to hand the floor over to you as you take and share your opening remarks. Welcome and thank you. The floor is yours.
Bonjour. Mesdames, Messieurs les ministres, Mesdames et Messieurs les membres du Conseil consultatif de l'initiative Action climatique pour l'emploi, Mesdames et Messieurs les représentants du système des Nations Unies et autres institutions internationales, Mesdames et Messieurs les représentants de l'Organisation internationale du travail, Mesdames et Messieurs les représentants des organisations de travailleurs et d'employeurs, chers collègues et amis, c'est un réel plaisir pour moi d'intervenir au cours de nos travaux marquant le lancement de l'initiative Action climatique pour l'emploi. Madame la directrice régionale, je voudrais au nom de tous les membres du Haut Conseil vous remercier pour cette invitation que vous nous avez faite pour aujourd'hui. L'enjeu du développement durable est central pour l'Afrique. Les dimensions économiques, sociales et environnementales sont indissociables. Il est essentiel d'amplifier les efforts vers une transition écologique qui prenne entièrement en compte les défis présents des gouvernants et les préoccupations des populations africaines. Parmi ces défis, il y a l'emploi des jeunes, l'accès à l'énergie, la construction des infrastructures, l'inclusion sociale et le genre. Dans le contexte de la transition écologique, la question de l'énergie présente un enjeu majeur à ce moment précis de notre évolution. Le paysage énergétique africain évolue rapidement. Cependant, cette évolution ne se fait pas dans une seule direction. Le développement des énergies renouvelables prend également une ampleur considérable. Dans le même temps, il s'accompagne de nouvelles découvertes de pétrole et de gaz. Tout ceci fait que la transition écologique s'accompagne d'une transition énergétique complexe qui a d'importantes ramifications pour la structure des économies et leurs futures perspectives de développement. Cependant, la problématique ne se limite pas à l'énergie. Des secteurs importants de l'économie africaine, tels que l'agriculture, le tourisme, le transport et l'industrie, sont dans des phases de transformation avec un effort de modernisation et d'expansion. Transformer ces secteurs économiques est vecteur de croissance durable et de création d'emplois, tout en réduisant l'impact écologique, implique un effort important de développement des compétences, de politique fiscale et d'accompagnement et de progrès technologique. La question de la transition juste est également une question vitale pour le secteur du tourisme, et cela l'est d'autant plus pour les pays insulaires africains. J'aimerais par conséquent attirer l'attention sur ce secteur fortement affecté par la pandémie de la COVID-19 pour faire front et atténuer les conséquences néfastes sur le plan économique et social. Les mandats tripartites nationaux du Sénégal ont signé seulement hier, il faut le dire, un pacte de stabilité sociale et de relance du secteur du tourisme. Ce pacte a été signé hier et je pense que le fait d'identifier ce secteur comme un secteur important l'est pour tous les pays africains. Mesdames et messieurs, le changement climatique affecte de manière brutale les pays de la zone du Sahel avec une avancée de la désertification. Cette situation constitue une des causes des migrations de travail involontaires. Il nous faut donc, par conséquent, avoir une approche cohérente et multidimensionnelle. Cependant, il y a des perspectives encourageantes de solutions. L'initiative de la Grande Muraille Verte en fait partie dans mon pays, le Sénégal. Je voudrais noter que le Sénégal fait partie des premiers pays africains à avoir mis en place une agence nationale de la Grande Muraille Verte. Je ne saurais terminer sans évoquer le rôle central du dialogue social dans la transformation économique et sociale qui est ainsi requise. Le dialogue social devait être au début et à la fin du processus. Lorsque nous évoquons la transition écologique, il s'agit principalement d'un processus de changement. Ce processus ne peut fonctionner effectivement que si les acteurs clés de l'économie réelle, les travailleurs, les employeurs et les gouvernements peuvent convenir ensemble des défis en face et des stratégies à développer pour les aborder. C'est pourquoi le Haut Conseil du dialogue social s'est engagé dans ce processus depuis plusieurs années. En partenariat avec le BIT, nous avons organisé une assemblée plénière spécifique sur la transition juste dans le cadre de l'exploitation du pétrole et du gaz au Sénégal pour apporter une contribution à la formulation des politiques et s'assurer que la dimension de l'emploi et la justice sociale soient prises en compte pleinement. L'initiative Action climatique pour l'emploi et le projet La dimension sociale de la transition écologique pourraient contribuer à consolider ces acquis, les mettre en exergue et susciter de pareilles actions dans d'autres pays. Le Haut Conseil du dialogue social a aussi consacré à une de ses assemblées plénières à l'examen de la problématique de l'employabilité et de l'entrepreneuriat des jeunes au Sénégal. Une quarantaine de jeunes ont été associés à cette réflexion qui a abouti à la formulation de 30 recommandations qui ont été soumises au chef de l'État, qui, après avoir mis en place un Conseil national pour l'insertion des jeunes, a initié un conseil présidentiel sur l'insertion et l'emploi des jeunes qui va se tenir demain. L'avenir se construit maintenant. C'est donc maintenant qu'il faut se hâter pour jeter les bases d'une transition vers des économies et des sociétés écologiquement durables. Mesdames et messieurs, c'est le message que je voulais aujourd'hui lancer à l'ensemble des pays africains et surtout de l'Afrique francophone. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a massive thank you to Madame Mundaye. If I could ask the technical host to please enable my video so that I am able to be back on screen. But thank you very much, Madame, for raising some critically important issues. You've raised the complexity, which demands that as we look at the Climate Action for Jobs initiative, as well as the project that we're talking about, the social dimension for ecological transition, that we come at this with a multi-dimensional approach, that we look at the skills lever, we look at fiscal policy as a lever, we look at technology as a lever. And of course, you've given us many examples, including the examples of what is happening in the tourism sector. A final word from you, which I thought was really incredible, is a reminder to all of us that we are indeed building the future today. And so with that, I'd like to hand over to our next guest, who is standing by, Madame Manouche Kavar, who we know is a member of the advisory group and the France delegate to the ILO. She joins us today to extend her words and her remarks at this regional launch event. Madame Kavar, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nozi, for this invitation. Mesdames et messieurs les ministres, chers collègues, je suis très heureuse de participer à cet événement de lancement régional de l'initiative Action climatique pour l'emploi. La France est membre fondateur de cette initiative, elle la soutient activement. Et je voudrais remercier l'OIT et tout particulièrement Madame la directrice régionale pour l'Afrique pour cette invitation. Vous le savez, la lutte contre le réchauffement climatique est au cœur des priorités portées par la France au plan national et international. Et l'épidémie de la Covid-19 n'a pas relégué ces enjeux au second plan. La pandémie nous rappelle au contraire l'urgence d'agir pour protéger notre biodiversité, notre planète et nos populations. Le secrétaire général de l'ONU le soulignait encore hier dans son rapport annuel. Nous sommes donc tous tenus à réduire nos émissions de carbone à l'échelle mondiale, et cela dans une proportion inédite. C'est un défi considérable qui nécessite de réorienter drastiquement nos économies, nos modes de production et de consommation. Cela implique des mutations majeures pour le marché de l'emploi. On souligne souvent que la transition écologique représente le plus grand vivier d'emploi pour l'avenir. L'accord de Paris prévoit une réduction de réchauffement climatique de 2 degrés, ce qui se traduirait, selon l'OIT, par une création nette de 18 millions d'emplois. Mais comme le souligne aussi l'OIT, toutes les régions ne sortent pas gagnantes. On doit donc prendre en compte la pression qui va peser sur des modèles économiques déjà fragiles et là où le niveau de pauvreté de certaines communautés conduit inexorablement à des situations inacceptables comme le travail des enfants. Pour cette raison, en France comme en Afrique, la transition ne doit pas se faire contre les citoyens, mais avec eux. Pour bâtir cette acceptabilité sociale, la transition écologique doit être pensée avant tout comme un vecteur de justice sociale et de réduction des inégalités. C'est par ce prisme et à cette condition que nous pourrons réorienter durablement à la fois nos politiques publiques et nos investissements en les centrant sur l'humain. D'un point de vue financier, nous devons apporter un soutien sans précédent aux secteurs impactés, les énergies fossiles, l'industrie, la construction ou l'agriculture, avec 3 priorités. La protection sociale d'abord, pour ne laisser aucun travailleur de ces secteurs au bord du chemin. La formation ensuite, par l'investissement dans les compétences de demain, dans la recherche et pour des gains de productivité. La création d'emplois décents, enfin, par l'investissement dans les infrastructures de qualité, en particulier pour les jeunes. Ces investissements doivent s'appuyer sur un financement solidaire. Au plan national d'abord, avec la mise en place de politiques fiscales équitables pour mobiliser des ressources nationales de façon transparente et pérenne. Au niveau international, ensuite, par le biais de programmes de coopération, je pense notamment au programme qui a été cité, financé par la France via l'OIT, sur la dimension sociale de la transition écologique en Côte d'Ivoire, au Nigeria, au Sénégal, ainsi qu'au Niger, au Ghana, au Maroc et en Algérie. Je pense aussi à l'action menée par le Fonds vert pour le climat, ou encore par l'Agence française du développement et d'autres agences. L'Agence française du développement, par exemple, consacre 50% de ses financements annuels, plus de 5 milliards d'euros, sur des projets environnementaux. Enfin, il est nécessaire de mieux intégrer l'impératif de transition juste dans l'architecture financière internationale, en orientant en particulier les droits de tirage spéciaux du FMI vers les dépenses consacrées à l'action climatique et à la protection sociale. On peut saluer ici l'action menée par la directrice du bureau régional de l'OIT pour renforcer la coordination avec la Banque mondiale ou la Banque africaine de développement au plus près du terrain dans les programmes pays. Ces mesures financières doivent s'accompagner d'une appropriation politique forte par tous nos citoyens. Pour cela, le dialogue social qui permet aux employeurs et aux travailleurs de participer à la prise de décision politique joue un rôle essentiel dans cette appropriation et pour concilier les objectifs économiques et sociaux avec les enjeux environnementaux. Mesdames et messieurs, l'initiative Action climatique pour l'emploi nous offre cette chance unique de mettre en commun les forces et faire converger la transition écologique avec la justice sociale. Je tiens à vous assurer du soutien de la France et j'appelle tous les partenaires à nous rejoindre. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Kava. Thank you very much for your resounding address. And the key and central message, of course, that we're hearing coming from you. Ladies and gentlemen, if I might ask, there is a microphone that's unmuted. Could we kindly mute all microphones? Madame Kava, you are reminding us about the impact and the possibility when all boots are on the ground, but also rooted in shared political will, which is spread across all stakeholders. You started off your address by focusing on urgency, which of course is a resounding message as we all look to act faster in the process of building back better. Thank you very much for that. It's my pleasure now to go to the Secretary General of the International Organization of Employers, or the IOE. It's my pleasure to hand over the floor to Mr. Roberto Suarez Santos, who today also plays a role in this regional launch event and shares his message with us now. Mr. Suarez Santos, the floor is yours, sir. Kindly requesting for you to unmute, sir.
Thank you very much, Nosifo. I'm sorry, I was not unmuted. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we feel very honored to be invited in this African exchange, which we believe is important and really pertinent and important in order precisely to push the agenda of climate action for jobs, which, by the way, is not just about exchanges, it's about identifying areas in which we can make a difference. I want to thank the ILO, I want to thank the regional director, Cynthia, for also approaching us and to invite us to provide our contribution. I also want to congratulate the ILO for the excellent videos that we just have seen on challenges and opportunities on climate change action in Africa. I think it presents a good balance on how we can approach this action. Of course, we have and we are witnessing a period of disaster to some extent in terms of job losses, in terms of enterprise losses. We are making estimations of how many jobs, but also how many companies are at the edge of collapsing. Some of these estimations, which apply also to the region, give us a figure which is quite dramatic, even which reached the number of 20% of existing and current companies, which risk to disappear, not just in Africa, in many areas of the world. But also we have, as in many other crises, important opportunities. And important opportunities in this case are linked to the climate action area. What we really believe, and we are firmly convinced, is that the future is a green future, should be a green future. It's not a choice to dissociate ourselves from the green agenda. Africa has strong assets, which have to do with the natural resources, we have to do with the youth bonus, we have to do also with the with some of the bases that can create a different environment for climate action. But let me identify areas in which not just business organizations, not just employers organizations, but the ILO, the trade unions, the workers organizations need to act together. I've been highlighting how convergence are the agendas of workers organizations and employers organizations in this matter. First of all, we need to be aware that the level of ambition that we need to put into place on innovation, on a productivity agenda, is higher than ever. And especially this applies to emerging economies, to developing economies. We cannot let the innovation approach be just for developed economies. Of course, we have an issue related and a challenge related to the transfer of innovation, but at the end of the day, if we do not manage to push a much more innovative approach in our societies, in our individuals, we will not get in the path that is needed to get Africa at the level of other economies. Cynthia referred to the Green Skills Agenda, and I think also the Honorable Minister of Ghana. We cannot insist more. The skills agenda, the ambition on the skills agenda that we repeated in the centenary ILO declaration, then it should not be dissociated from the green skills agenda. Capacities to anticipate these jobs, which are linked to a new future, a new scenario, are totally linked also to the new sectors, the current sectors also, where the jobs will be. It's not just about the energy sector, but also much more traditional sectors. This has been also the focus of some recent ILO research and outcomes, which we should be using in a much efficient manner. The future has also to do with social protection systems. We are referring to the sustainable path. The sustainable path will never be achieved, again, if we do not build with a much more focused approach social protection schemes. Social protection schemes which needs to help better transitions, just transitions, from one job to the other, from one sector to the other. This is still not the case in many economies, but we can make a difference if we act jointly. It's not just about financial resources, but also about the right policies. Lessons learned in social protection systems which promotes employment intermediate services, cooperation with the private sector, efficient partnerships. There are many things to do, there are many actions to be taken if we apply the intelligent also policies. It's about also focus, stimulus, and incentives. Right now, many companies are risking their own survival mood, but it's also true that the finance access is not yet there. The funds that are needed also to keep a company running come late and sometimes come with a much bureaucracy, much requirements. We need much more focused stimulus and incentives on those areas which will also be sustainable for the future. We also believe that we need to build further the business case, the demand side, and that has to do also with the way we stimulate a proper business environment, which is far away from being the case in many economies, which means also having much efficient institutions, struggling, fighting against corruption, but also promoting better the entrepreneurship approach. Creativeness, innovation has to do with entrepreneurs. If we do not believe that individuals who have an idea, who have an approach, need to be protected. We need to be preserved in their approach, in their entrepreneurship. We will not get the decent jobs and the green jobs agenda. Let me also remind that climate action, especially in developed economies and also in Africa, has to do with the way we tackle informality. We cannot tolerate that more than 70% of occupied individuals are in the informal sector. It's not just an ethical issue. It's not just a question of action to get decent jobs. It's also a question of sustainable future, economic growth. If we are not much more efficient in the way we approach informality, with the basis that we have in the ILO and with the recommendations that we all agreed to promote transitions to formalities, we'll never also get into the climate action area with an efficient approach. Finally, I want to refer to the social dialogue and the role of social partners. We are also very much impressed about action that has been undertaken in Côte d'Ivoire, hearing also the Honorable Minister of Côte d'Ivoire. This is the approach that also will make a difference. Workers and employers acting jointly with a national dialogue agenda on jobs for climate action also will bear fruit in the short term. I think that, Nofiso, I think that you were the one referring to people as agents of change. Much of the change that we need has to do with attitudes, with mentalities. If you look at the time that we spent at the workplace, we will notice how important that employers' organizations and workers' organizations act jointly precisely to have this change of attitudes on the ground. That's why we are also very much stimulated and excited about not just the climate action initiative that we launched together, but also the area of action, I mean, the concrete action that the ILO regional office is already undertaking with some countries. And we are much more committed on these countries, but in other countries, I mean, Algeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Morocco, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, Zimbabwe, are going also to take very seriously their commitments. But we are also, as employers' organizations, as business organizations, as IOE, going to take very seriously this agenda. What we bring to the table is not just the representative and independent voice of business, but also the capacity to shape policies, to influence this policy in the right manner, and to do it jointly with the workers' organizations. It's true that we need capacity. We need to strengthen this capacity with the help of ILO. But this commitment at the highest level, this commitment also with the support of IOE, also will bear some fruits. Count on that commitment, count on our capacity to work together and to bring also the ILO leadership within the UN family at the place it deserves. We have many tools that can be very useful, but that also needs to have a much more ambitious approach on areas we have to do with investment, with development, with societies. We really believe that the future is and should be in Africa. We really believe that the future is green. There's no choice, and there is an urgent need to act now. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roberto Suarez Santos, and much packed into that statement. I'm just going to lift one thing, which I think it's a beautiful invitation for all of us to pause and reflect on our mental models, on our mindsets, on our attitudes, because as you're saying, this is the fundamental starting point that's going to change how we are framing challenges, how we're seeing opportunities, and how we're responding that through the policies that we bring to the fore. Thank you very much for that. Our final speaker in this opening session, before we get to our first panel discussion, is the General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation. It's my absolute pleasure to hand over to you, Madame Sharon Barrow, my apologies. It's lovely to see you again and to hand over the virtual stage to you at this point.
Thank you very much. Well, I think this is one area where largely we can actually count that there is a commonality between business and workers. We are almost out of time. There is no argument from Labor that we have to get to net zero if we're to stabilise the planet for human beings, to be able to live and work in a sustainable and stable environment. We are indeed trying now to build what we call the new social contract to ensure recovery and indeed resilience as we move through, still living with COVID-19 and the devastating impacts, but understanding that recovery must in fact build a sustainable future. That resilience must put people at the heart of that resilient future. And what does that mean? For us, it means, of course, jobs are absolutely number one priority of that new social contract. Jobs, jobs, and jobs, but they must be climate-friendly jobs with just transition. And I'm heartened today to hear the ministers. Indeed, I'm sure Roberto also said this, but that we're heartened to hear that the ministers who've spoken have committed to social dialogue. Social dialogue is at the core of the dialogue tables we must see in every nation, in every industry, if we're to get plans to get us to net zero. More than half of that has to be done by 2030. And of course, it has to be done with just transition. Why do we stress this? We stress it because if people don't see a future, if they can't see jobs, if they can't see decent work, and that, of course, means the second element of the new social contract, which is rights, and the promise of the Centenary Declaration with labour rights and protections for all workers, irrespective of informal or formal employment arrangements, plus universal social protection, the third pillar, and, of course, a transformative agenda for women, which is part of the fourth pillar of inequality, income inequality, gender inequality, and race. And we want to see inclusion. So it means just transition for technology as well as for climate change. This takes dialogue, it takes planning, it takes an approach to a future economy that is quite different. But I want to say, while this is now urgent, and as we get to 2030, more than half of global emissions have to be tackled, and indeed the Sustainable Development Goals realised. So as we build those just recovery plans, they have to have a sustainable base, absolutely without question. And we all have to be committed to that. There's good news in it, though. If you look at the deficit for energy security in Africa, I understand it's about $50 billion to plug the energy security gap. So we need to plug that with renewable energy transitions that set Africa up for a future, that don't leave them behind again with old technology that actually is not going to fuel transition, as a basis for the transitions in other technologies that have to happen in every sector, in the way we work, in the business construct, in the way we design a national and global economy that accounts for local ambition. And so there is good news, as I said. If you think about in the distributed renewable energy sector in countries like Nigeria and other African countries, then there are twice as many informal jobs as indeed there are formal jobs. But we know that when you actually invest in a transition that is about decent work, we can formalize those jobs. And I picked Nigeria because I was really happy to see that the government's reached out to the unions, to the employers to say, how do they actually integrate just transition and social dialogue to get the plans that are necessary into their NDCs, their national climate plans, or their determined contributions that they will pledge to the COP. And the sad news is that while Nigeria is working on that, and I know others are as well, and we heard from the ministers on that score, nevertheless, I can tell you of the NDCs from all countries, developed and developing countries, submitted to date, Only 25% are ambitious. Only 8% have just transition recognized as a commitment, and 13 social dialogue. That's not good enough. So this forum can actually kickstart a whole new set of commitments in Africa. I agree with Roberto. If we can't make this advisory body work for Africa as well as for the other continents, then we are not going to be able to say that we're headed towards decent work, a new social contract, and the recovery and resilience we need. I want to pick up on a couple of other pieces of optimism, though, because we know when you invest in any area of climate, starting with energy and moving through to other sectors, because all sectors have to transition if we're going to make this challenge, then you can invest in jobs that actually deliver incredible amounts of dividend. Again, just going to the energy sector, if you actually invest in energy directly, for every 10 jobs, you get 5 to 10 indirect jobs, and you get a dividend of up to 30 jobs from the economic stimulus that is actually put into the economy from those jobs and decent wages. And as I said, we can formalize those jobs through social dialogue. So that's got to be an ambition. And to give you just a little more heart, when you actually put money into building efficiency, you get 157% more jobs than putting it into fossil fuels. In bioenergy, 130% more jobs. In industrial efficiency, 92% more jobs. In solar, 79% more jobs. In wind, 76%. In hydro, 71%. And indeed, when you upgrade the grids for renewable energy and distributed energy integration, you get 67%. And if you just go to rapid transit versus continuing the struggle to build bigger and better roads, then you get 59%. The jobs dividend is serious. My final word is on financing. Africa cannot do this alone. And there are two elements of this. One is shared technology. If we don't share IP, if we have an old model where the IP belongs to the global monopoly, the companies that actually take the financial flows from that to their own profits, then we will not make the deadline and we will not create a just model of development. And every dollar of investment now must go to making sure that this is sustainable. There is no more brown and green economy and choices. If we want people to have jobs on a living planet, then we need to invest in climate action. There's no choice. Roberto's right about that. We all stand ready at the national and global level to work with employers and governments to get the just transition plans, the plans for sustainability in place. I know it's painful. You come from South Africa, you know it's painful, but it has to be done. We can't lie to workers. There are no jobs on a dead planet, and this is about creating a stable living environment for generations to come. Thank you very much. And to the ILO, we are delighted to be part of this initiative, because if it doesn't work in Africa, we will have failed.
Madame Barrow, thank you very much. There are no jobs on a dead continent, and so much that was raised. The business case for the jobs dividend, dollars that need to be channeled to green projects. Let's get brown off the agenda altogether. You spoke a lot about the formalization point, which we know that Mr. Suarez Santos also raised. But your starting point, Madame Barrow, we are almost out of time. And certainly that is one of the things I'd like to lift in this conversation. Thank you very much to all our speakers who have really created a beautiful framework in terms of the opening remarks in this launch event. What we are going to do now is that we're going to notch up the pace a little bit as we go into our panel discussions. But before I do that, here is an opportunity just to share with you a short presentation on the Climate Action for Jobs initiative. And on the back of that, I am going to then be picking up and going into our very first panel discussion. A short video now, and I'll see you straight after. Enjoyed that, of course, sharing more information, not only about the Climate Action for Jobs initiative, but also on the social dimension of the Just Ecological Transition project, which has made up a huge component of the conversations this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, I did say that our panel discussions are going to be about answering some very specific questions. This panel discussion is looking at the question of the needs and priorities in meeting countries' just transition commitments. What are those needs? What are those priorities? It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Irima Talfa, who's on screen right now. He is, of course, the Permanent Secretary in the Federal Ministry of Labor and Employment in Nigeria, and joins us in the conversation. Thank you very much, Dr. Talfa, for making the time to join us. We are also joined by Mr. Idrissa Jibrila, who is the Secretary General of the Democratic Confederation of Workers from Niger, or CDTN, and he joins us in this conversation as well, and he's just popped his camera on, so massive gratitude to have you as well, sir. And also rounding up this panel discussion as our third speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Margaret Chitiga Mabugu. She is the co-chair, part of the International Technical Group for the Climate Action Jobs Initiative. She's also the director of the School of Public Management and Administration at the University of Pretoria, my alma mater. So it's really fantastic to be able to welcome her into this conversation. Now, given the fact that time has run away with us, I'm going to ask my audience to forgive me on the fact that I will not be sharing any bias in the conversation, really so that we can make up some of the time and really pick up the pace in the conversation at this point. Professor Chitiga, thank you very much. I was just going to ask you to keep your camera on. But let me start with you, Dr. Talfa. You know, Nigeria has come up in the conversation now. We heard from Sharon Barrow, as she was also making reference to Nigeria. And the question to you is this: as the government of the largest economy in Africa and an important oil and gas producer, how is Nigeria addressing just transition? And maybe, Dr. Tafar, you could share with us, what are your key priorities in Nigeria?
Thank you very much for inviting Nigeria to participate in this very, very focused discussion. And first and foremost, let me acknowledge the presence of the ILO Assistant Director General and Regional Director for Africa, Cynthia Samuel Olunjuwon, and other participants and advisory board members. Nigeria will want to commend the ILO on the Climate for Jobs initiative and associate itself with the mission, vision, and priorities of this initiative. Before I became a permanent secretary in the Ministry of Labor and Employment of Nigeria, I was the national focal point for the UNFCCC in the Federal Ministry of Environment. There, I was responsible for the development of Nigeria's NDC and certainly issues of the impact of the just transition or the impact of climate change on jobs is very paramount to us when we were developing the NDC. As you all know, the NDC committed to 20% reduction of greenhouse gases in 5 priority sectors, unconditionally, and 45% with conditionally with international support. Basically, one of the priority areas is the oil and gas sector. And therefore, Nigeria, as an oil producing country, is definitely concerned with the impact of climate change as we transit from dependence on fossil fuel to a green economic pathway. Therefore, we are very central in this discussion. So when I found myself in the Ministry of Labor and Employment, my greatest priority is how do we transit to a low carbon economic pathway without impacting negatively in job creations. So what I did, oncoming as part of our effort towards the just transition to a carbon-free economy, in November, we established a committee on climate action for job initiative at the ministerial level. This committee has developed a draft national action plan on climate action for job initiative, of which the key action areas of that work plan includes collaborate and synergize with relevant stakeholders to ensure a just transition. It cannot be done alone by the focal point of climate change or even by the Ministry of Labor and Employment alone, but there's need for collaboration and synergy. This will include expanding the committee to include the Federal Ministry of Environment to ensure technical expertise. We are also part of the action plan is to sensitize stakeholders on the climate action for just transition initiative and educate various sectors on their roles in ensuring a just transition. Nigeria has a large population of youths that are unemployed. If you have observed towards the tail end of last year, there was a lot of uprising across the country by the youths. We call it NSAS. SARS is an acronym for the military, the police, and the youths felt that they have been brutalized by the police, and then they use that platform. But basically, it's because of unemployment across the country. Therefore, the focus of this initiative should be towards job creation. The 5 priority sectors which are mentioned in the NDC all have avenues and channels to provide jobs for the teeming population, especially in the agricultural sector, in the communication sector, as well as in the oil and gas sector, and even in transportation as a whole. So I remember before I left the position of the focal point, we had interacted with the ILO and did an assessment of the impact of climate change on jobs in Nigeria. That report is very robust. It should serve as a document that these initiatives should really lay their hands on and use it towards its implementation across the country. Also, I want to commend the ILO on the launch of this initiative and to indicate that creating decent jobs is at the heart of the present administration in Nigeria. And also Nigeria has always promoted best practices in social dialogue, which happens to be one of the priority areas of the project. Only just recently, we convened our 2021 session of the National Labour Advisory Council meeting, where the tripartite deliberated and arrived at consensus on issues aimed at promoting social justice in the world of work. We are willing to
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not just checking in that I'm not the only one who's stopped hearing Dr. Tafa. So I see Prof.
Participate in knowledge sharing country. Yes, can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Permanent Secretary. You lost your connection for a second, but if you may kindly begin to wrap as we move on to the next question.
Yes. So in conclusion, let me just indicate that Nigeria is currently reviewing its NDC, and issues of just transition are integral into the revised NDC, which we are not backsliding on it, but we are going to still take up commitments very robustly, because the present NDC is one of the most ambitious in Nigeria. And still, in addition to the 5 priority sectors, we are also bringing in issues of job creation centrally and the just transition. We have been collaborating very closely with the Nigerian Labour Congress as tripartite partners in elaborating these particular issues. So we welcome this initiative and we are available. And I have indicated that with the assessment that we have initially done, that will serve as a working document to work towards this implementation. Thank you very much.
Dr. Talfa, thank you very much for that robust answer. So you've spoken about the oil and gas sector as being one of the priorities. You've spoken about the work being done in terms of sensitizing stakeholders. And of course, the understanding that even at the root of youth unemployment, or youth unemployment leads to social unrest, as we saw in Nigeria, and the importance of political will to really do the right things. I do want to say thank you very much to those that are sending us questions in the chat, and I'm going to ask our panelists to also just look at the chat, the Q&A function, because they can see that as well. There's a very good question to Sharon Barrow. So Sharon, if you're able to answer that online, that would be fantastic. And it is, I'm very interested in hearing again or giving reference where I can see the job multiplier effect that was mentioned by Sharon Barrow. That is in terms of direct or indirect job effect, etc. So I'm sure this was about the job dividend that you spoke about. So allow me then maybe to move on to Mr. Idrissa Jubila. Thank you very much, sir, for being here. We've heard in the opening remarks about some of the priorities for Africa and what these should be. For example, Sharon Barrow spoke about the energy sector. We heard about the tourism sector from Madame Ntapingaya. And so, as I bring this question to you, do you think these priorities are the same for Niger? And how are social partners engaging on these issues? More importantly, how might we better support social partners so that they are engaging and getting their voices heard? Over to you, sir.
Bien, merci de l'occasion que vous me donnez. Je dois dire que la Confédération démocratique des travailleurs du Niger, CDTN, est la première centrale syndicale au Niger. Elle est affiliée aussi à la Confédération syndicale internationale. Votre question, je la décompose en 3 parties. D'abord, la question des priorités au Niger. Et je dois dire que les priorités au Niger sont les mêmes que dans les autres pays africains, à savoir le développement du secteur énergétique, ce développement du secteur énergétique qui est propre à tous les pays africains en général et particulièrement à ceux du Sahel. C'est aussi la promotion des énergies renouvelables, dont particulièrement l'énergie solaire, qui pourrait être bien exploitée dans nos pays à cause de la forte chaleur. Actuellement au Niger, nous sommes sous une température de 44 degrés Celsius. Et voyez-vous donc, c'est un secteur qu'on peut bien exploiter. La promotion des énergies renouvelables, que ce soit l'énergie solaire ou l'énergie éolienne, toutes ces énergies-là peuvent être exploitées dans notre pays. Et l'électrification dans les zones rurales. Voyez-vous, au Niger, jusqu'à présent, il n'y a que moins de 15% de la population qui a accès à l'énergie électrique. Donc, l'énergie électrique dans les zones rurales est une priorité. Voici en termes de priorité, comme vous l'avez dit, les priorités au Niger sont comme celles dans les autres pays. Maintenant, la deuxième partie de votre question, à savoir la participation des travailleurs au débat sur l'écologie juste, je dois dire que notre participation se fait à travers les différents cadres de dialogue social. Au Niger, nous avons plusieurs cadres de dialogue social sur les questions environnementales, tels que le Conseil national de l'environnement et le développement durable dont nous sommes membres, la Commission nationale du dialogue social, le Conseil national du travail et les différentes rencontres sur le climat auxquelles les travailleurs ont été toujours invités, que ce soit au Niger, que ce soit au niveau international. Donc nous, en tant que travailleurs, c'est à travers ces différents cadres et ces différentes rencontres que nous participons à ces débats. En ce qui concerne comment aider les partenaires sociaux, le premier point, c'est le renforcement du dialogue social. Nous pensons que pour qu'il y ait une participation active des travailleurs, il faut renforcer le dialogue social. Et ce dialogue social, certes, il y a les mécanismes, mais ces mécanismes ont besoin d'être plus renforcés, plus huilés, plus aptes. Le deuxième aspect, c'est la formation sur différentes thématiques. Il est important que les partenaires sociaux que nous sommes, que nous soyons formés sur les différentes thématiques, thématiques transition écologique, thématiques énergie renouvelable, thématiques les défis environnementaux, surtout que notre pays exploite des mines dans la partie nord et dans sa partie est. Aussi sur la question des énergies renouvelables, comme je l'ai dit tantôt. Il est important que les partenaires sociaux soient formés sur ces thématiques, qu'ils comprennent les enjeux liés à ces thématiques-là. L'autre aspect, c'est le développement même de la formation professionnelle et technique dans notre pays. Notre pays a un besoin de formation professionnelle et technique, surtout à la formation initiale comme à la formation continue, et que nous ayons des travailleurs bien formés qui assimilent ces aspects-là. Et l'élément important aussi, c'est le renforcement des enjeux internationaux, tels que les nouvelles technologies de l'information. Il est important que les travailleurs comprennent comment les nouvelles technologies de l'information et de la communication peuvent être utilisées pour que leur participation soit bien efficace. Voici quelques éléments qui, à notre avis, constituent des enjeux pour les partenaires sociaux, pour que leur participation soit une participation appréciée par tous. Mais sinon, le Niger a les mêmes préoccupations que les autres pays. Quand j'écoutais tout à l'heure le secrétaire permanent du ministre nigérien, c'est comme s'il est en train de brosser la même situation qu'au Niger parce que nous sommes des pays voisins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Drubila. Thank you very much. And certainly some very practical issues that really should be focused.
Oui, j'ai des petits soucis techniques, mais ça va un peu, je vous entends bien, je vous vois.
May I kindly ask, there is somebody who is unmuted at the moment. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for putting those issues on the table, Mr. Drubila. You've spoken about strengthening social dialogue. You've spoken about the importance of training and skills, of sharing information, of increasing operational capacity so that workers and workers' organizations can really make their voices heard in these key issues and have an impact on how we're driving the future that we are building together. Allow me then now to go to Professor Chitiga Mabugu. And Madam, if we pause and we look at the work that you've been doing, many years spent looking at the analysis between the intersection or the nexus between environmental, social, as well as economic aspects. And so the question to you is, firstly, is it possible to speak about joint challenges that are common across the African continent when we're talking about a just transition? And also to get your reflections on this question of priorities. What do you think the main priorities and needs for Africa in relation to the just transition should be? So I'd love to hear your thoughts in response to that dual question.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nosipo. Thank you to ILO for this invitation. So firstly, I thought to organize myself in three topics, just talking about challenges, and I'm deliberately going to be very general, hoping that we can continue these conversations. I'll talk about challenges, I talk about possible opportunities, and then I want to talk about some non-negotiable ingredients that we require in order for us to take these opportunities seriously. So for challenges, these are fairly well known. Many speakers have already talked about these challenges. We know, of course, that Africa is the continent that's really plagued with poverty, inequality, joblessness, unsustainable, non-inclusive growth. At the same time, in general, institutions and governance are weak. That's number one challenge. Number two challenge, and this has been articulated already, climate change hits Africa and African people, and especially poor people, in terms of water, land, wildlife, agriculture, among others. It also hits on the pathways out of poverty, such as ecosystems, human health, and others. Number three big challenge is, of course, this whole sometimes recently silent narrative that Africa does have discoveries in oil, in gas, for example. It has also, in South Africa, where I am right now, invested a lot in fossil fuels. So the question that Africa must somehow leapfrog all these investments and these discoveries into renewables still is an uneasy conversation that happens, given, of course, the idea and the knowledge that developed countries have in the past benefited from these very investments. That's a challenge. A fourth challenge is, unfortunately, in general, a fiscal muscle in Africa is weak. There is not sustained foreign direct investment coming in. Borrowing is a huge problem on the African continent, and this is indeed a very big challenge. Fifth is a challenge that really sits very closely to what I do as an academic, is that we do not have enough capacity, enough trained people, enough skilled people in contributing to research, in contributing to conversations about climate change, about sustainability, that allow policymakers to make the right decisions. That is in Africa. So in these conversations, we have seen that there are groups that are left behind, women, children, disabled, and so on, that are outside of the conversations. And this is a huge challenge in Africa. What are some of the opportunities? Again, a lot has already been said, and people here in this virtual meeting are more experienced than me, but we know that there is evidence that shows that green investments are profitable. And I use profitable loosely in the sense that it grows economies, it grows jobs. Madame Barrow said a lot about this already in terms of the jobs dividend. A second opportunity for Africa is that Africa actually does need green investments. Despite all the investments we've had in fossils and this discoveries we mentioned, we're still inadequate in terms of energy. Public transport is not good, housing is not good. So actually this is a huge opportunity, this continent, for green investments and greening and sustainable development. Africa is a rich continent. This was already mentioned. We have the sun, my colleague mentioned just now. We have wind, we have fertile soils, we have forests, we have lithium, we have cobalt, and many others. And we have many, many unemployed, young, energetic people who want to work. This is a huge opportunity for Africa. COVID has also presented an opportunity for Africa that we can actually start to think of growing or building back better, for lack of a better expression, and go greener, go green strategies. We can really take advantage of COVID-19. Another opportunity, again, from where I sit, is that we have strong partnerships between academic organizations such as mine, between us and governments, the private sector, development partners such as ILO and others, and NGOs and donor organizations. We should take advantage of these partnerships. So finally, let me talk about the last title that I wanted to share here, some non-negotiable ingredients. So I start with something that sits very closely to my heart, in case I am cut off before I finish. The issue of training people, the issue of cutting edge research. So I saw a question now to Madame Barrow from someone saying, where do we get these numbers? How do we have this, how do we know about what jobs are created where? This is something we need to also invest in. So as a lecturer myself, as a professor, as a researcher in the University of Pretoria, we are seized with this. But in addition, I'm working very closely with the ILO. We have a GAIN training hub here in Pretoria to do just this, to do these types of training. I work also very closely with the UNDP, again, continuing with a capacity development of researchers, of local people, of policymakers, young officers working in governments. Those who are seized with writing NDCs and so on need to have this kind of cutting edge research techniques. I also work very closely with the Partnership for Economic Policy, PEP, where again we develop tools that assist researchers, that assist policymakers in making informed decisions. This is absolutely a non-negotiable. So as we fund countries, as we give funding for climate action, we must not forget to give funding for developing skills, research skills in our African countries. Well, we need funding. This was already mentioned. We need investments, but we also need African governments to commit to having enabling policies and also to use these funds ethically. This is unfortunately an issue that we need to open up and talk about quite frankly within our African governments. Finally, I just want to say, Mr. Walala, Africa has to come together in one voice. As we go and negotiate in our NDCs, we need to be one. It was already mentioned that the issue of climate change affects all of us, and therefore we need to work as one continent. The African Free Trade Area Agreement, for example, is one positive step that we can use for such kinds of deliberations. So thank you very much. I won't through very fast, and I'm happy eventually to talk more about this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Prof. You did go through very fast, but in that going fast, you left a lot on the table for us to think about. Now, ladies and gentlemen, so much that the Prof has raised in terms of challenges, opportunities, but I really appreciated you raising the non-negotiables, the kind of things that if we don't get right, we are going to find ourselves standing stock still. And really, these panel discussions are an invitation to put on the table some of the key issues that we still need to grapple with. So it's my pleasure really to thank Dr. Tafara, to thank Mr. Idrissa Jibala, to thank Professor Chitiga Mabugu for their participation in helping us answer this question of how do we surface the needs and understand the priorities of countries that have committed to a just transition. Most importantly, how do we create those pathways to support those countries as they move towards them? So I'm going to close this first conversation as we hurtle forward into our second and final conversation. But before we do that, I'd like to tap into the voice of social media, the global conversation that we've started on the back of this conversation together. And just to acknowledge some of the conversation that is out there, we've got, so I'm seeing it's a little bit blurry, but Karen Kimbra, who's a chief economist at LinkedIn, is saying, looking forward to ILO Green Week and discussing with Mustafa Kamal Guier and Sumati Subramaniam. And we're seeing, of course, the end of that. So really galvanizing some of the energy that's coming through. Somebody else's, the ILO page is saying the pandemic is just a dress rehearsal for climate change. What a powerful, powerful statement that is coming through there. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to continue sharing your thoughts on social media. When we're done with our second panel discussion, we're going to come back and see what that social media voice actually looks like. For now, though, allow me to move swiftly ahead into our second and final panel discussion. Again, I'm going to ask you to accept my apologies in advance, as I will not be reading out any of the bios of our speakers, as we are really, really tight for time at the moment. Allow me, though, to introduce our speakers and invite them to switch on their cameras. I'd like to introduce the Director of Strategies and Programs and Employment Programs, Mr. Azandrol Kauku. This is, of course, in the Ministry of Employment and Social Protection of Côte d'Ivoire. Welcome, sir. Lovely to have you here with us. Allow me to welcome the head of the EU delegation to Ghana. Her camera's just come on. That's Madame Diana Akonsia. Thank you very much, Madame, for being here with us. Professor Anthony Nyong, I see that you've just joined us. Thank you very much. Professor Nyong is, of course, the Africa Regional Director at the Global Center on Adaptation, was also the Director of Climate Change and Green Growth at the African Development Bank. We are also joined in this conversation by Dr. Israel Murefu. Dr. Murefu, if you can switch your camera on so that I can have a look and see where you are. And I'm going to ask all of our other speakers to please keep their cameras on. Dr. Murefu is, oh, there he is. Thank you very much, sir, for being here. He is the president of the Employers Confederation of Zimbabwe. Thank you for being here. And the camera is also on for Mr. Babacar Sila. Thank you, Mr. Sila, for having your camera on. He is, of course, a member of the National Confederation of Workers of Senegal. Thank you all for making the time to join us. Mr. Kauku, I'm going to start off with you. And I'm going to position the question as such. In Côte d'Ivoire, we know that an analysis has been conducted on climate change and that the creation for green jobs for just transition has been part of this analysis. And it clearly shows that job creation opportunities, it lifts some of those job creation opportunities that are linked to your national determined contribution, your NDC. The question to you, sir, is what are the next steps and what do we need for these opportunities to materialize? Let me pause there and give you an opportunity to respond. I am going to put pressure on all my panelists and ask you to be as concise as possible as we power this conversation. Mr. Gaku, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup à la modératrice. Au nom de Monsieur le ministre Maître Kamara Adama, ministre de l'Emploi et de la Protection sociale, nous remercions le BIT de nous avoir associés à cette session. Rapidement, pour aller au cœur de votre question, que nous allons répondre à deux niveaux. D'abord sur les prochaines étapes et ensuite sur les actions fortes pour pouvoir capitaliser sur les opportunités d'emploi qui existent au niveau local. Relativement à la première question, il faut dire qu'à l'issue d'un atelier de promotion des emplois verts le 20 décembre 2019, avec l'ensemble des parties prenantes au niveau national, il y a eu une recommandation forte qui a demandé que nous puissions formuler une stratégie nationale intégrée de transition, avec de promotion des emplois verts, avec l'appui du BIT, en l'instar de ce qui se fait au Ghana. Et il faut dire que en termes de, à l'issue de cet atelier, comme on parle de prochaine étape, la première étape à notre niveau, c'est de pouvoir finaliser d'ici juin 2021 cette stratégie ainsi que son plan de mise en œuvre afin d'entamer son déploiement d'ici fin 2021. Donc, c'est pour nous la première étape. Parce que cette stratégie, il faut le dire, à l'horizon 2030, vise à soutenir la croissance inclusive de la Côte d'Ivoire à travers le verdissement des emplois. Et pour ce faire, la stratégie entend promouvoir la transition vers des emplois verts décents dans tous les secteurs de l'économie nationale et dans toutes les régions du pays en vue de soutenir durablement la lutte contre le sous-emploi et la pauvreté, en réduisant la pression sur les ressources naturelles et les émissions de gaz à effet de serre. Parce que je rappelle au passage que la Côte d'Ivoire est un des pays en voie de développement où nous avons 9 emplois sur 10 qui sont des emplois informels. La deuxième étape à notre niveau, c'est de pouvoir organiser un plaidoyer auprès des PTF et des partenaires des secteurs privés, des collectivités aussi territoriales, pour mobiliser des ressources pour le financement du plan d'action de la stratégie dont je parlais tout à l'heure. La troisième étape, c'est de lancer sur l'initiative du ministère de l'Environnement et du Développement durable, en lien avec le ministère de l'Emploi et de la Protection sociale et le ministère de la Promotion de la jeunesse, de l'insertion des jeunes et du service civique, des principales filières vertes à travers, entre autres, la promotion du catalogue des métiers et emplois verts qui existe déjà au niveau de la Côte d'Ivoire, en vue d'encourager les jeunes et les personnes vulnérables à l'entrepreneuriat et au projet AGR à travers ces filières vertes-là à fort potentiel de création d'emplois. La quatrième et dernière étape, en termes de next step, c'est de pouvoir renforcer les programmes existants de création d'emplois et de renforcement de développement des compétences portés par les principales structures en charge de l'emploi et de la formation, par la prise en compte de ces filières vertes-là au profit des jeunes et des personnes vulnérables dans le courant de l'année 2021. Donc, on a des programmes qui sont portés par des structures en charge de l'emploi et de la formation. Nous allons faire en sorte de pouvoir verdir ces programmes existants-là pour que d'ici la fin de l'année, on puisse rendre effectif ces initiatives. Donc, en termes de next step, voilà les quatre grandes étapes que nous pouvons indiquer. En termes d'action forte, pour finir rapidement sur votre préoccupation, il faut dire que nous pouvons les résumer en 8 points principalement, mais ça va aller très vite. D'abord, on va, pour ne pas dire, la Côte d'Ivoire va faire en sorte de pouvoir renforcer le cadre institutionnel et réglementaire par la prise en compte des tests, en fait, dans les tests et les politiques publiques, la notion de la transition juste des économies et des sociétés écologiquement durables en vue de verdir les 10 tests. Voilà, parce qu'il faut commencer par verdir ces tests-là pour pouvoir permettre à ce que cela puisse rentrer dans les mœurs au plus haut niveau. La deuxième action forte, c'est de pouvoir renforcer les capacités humaines et technologiques ainsi que l'amélioration de l'employabilité ciblée sur ces filières vertes. Parce que j'ai indiqué en ce qui nous concerne à la Côte d'Ivoire que nous avons un catalogue des métiers et des emplois qui existent. Donc, c'est de pouvoir renforcer, dans le cadre de la mise en œuvre de ces métiers issus de ce catalogue-là, la capacité humaine, de sorte à permettre aux jeunes et personnes vulnérables de pouvoir effectivement s'intéresser à ces secteurs, à ces filières-là. La troisième action forte, c'est de pouvoir faciliter l'accès au financement et au développement des marchés verts. Parce qu'on a au niveau de la finance verte, ici au niveau de la Côte d'Ivoire, on a d'énormes potentialités et des opportunités. Et nos PME ont du mal à avoir accès. Voilà. Et donc, il va falloir que nous puissions faciliter l'accès au financement et au développement de ce marché vert-là, par une promotion des fonds verts, hein, et une orientation des investissements privés aussi également. Aussi, nous allons, en termes de quatrième action forte, apporter un appui à l'insertion des jeunes, à l'entrepreneuriat féminin dans les filières vertes. Parce que les filles aussi, bien qu'elles soient instruites ou non, dans le cadre de la promotion du genre, méritent une attention particulière. Et donc, il y a des métiers qui peuvent être adressés à ces filles-là, à la jeune féminine. Donc, nous allons faire aussi l'effort de pouvoir faire un focus là-dessus. Cinquième action forte, c'est de pouvoir éteindre la couverture médicale aux porteurs de projets verts et les travailleurs informels par leur prise en compte à travers la couverture maladie universelle. Parce que la Côte d'Ivoire, dans le cadre de la promotion de la protection sociale, a déployé un instrument qu'on appelle la couverture maladie universelle et qui est un instrument que nous allons ici utiliser. Et heureusement encore que nous avons conduit au sein du ministère ce projet-là qui est aujourd'hui en phase de déploiement. Et donc, nous sommes ravis de pouvoir en parler. Et donc, c'est un instrument sur lequel nous allons nous appuyer. Et étendre aussi la couverture, enfin, la protection sociale. La protection sociale aux travailleurs indépendants issus des filières VET, par effectivement leur prise en compte à travers le régime social des travailleurs indépendants qui est porté par la Caisse nationale de prévoyance sociale. Donc, du coup, ce sont des instruments sur lesquels nous allons nous appuyer. Et enfin, la huitième action forte et dernière action forte, c'est de pouvoir renforcer le cadre de gouvernance de l'emploi par une meilleure prise en compte des emplois verts à travers l'intégration de nouvelles structures au sein du Comité national de l'emploi qui existe depuis 2015 sur la présidence du ministre en charge de l'emploi. Et donc, de façon concrète, il s'agit au titre du gouvernement de pouvoir intégrer le ministère de l'Environnement et du Développement durable parce que déjà le ministère de l'Agriculture, le ministère des Mines, du Pétrole et de l'Énergie, le ministère des Eaux et Forêts et le ministère de l'Assainissement et de la Salubrité existent déjà dans ce comité national-là. Dans le ministère de l'Environnement.
I could interject, sir, and just ask that we begin to wrap up the response in the interest of time. My apologies. If I could invite you just to complete your.
Il n'y a pas de problème. Et donc, en termes de conclusion, c'est de dire qu'en termes de prochaines étapes, nous pourrons les résumer en 4 points, je les ai indiqués, et en termes d'action forte en 8 étapes. Mais pour le dernier point, c'est de pouvoir peut-être au titre, dans le cadre de l'enforcement du cadre de gouvernance, en plus du ministère de l'Environnement, à intégrer dans le Comité national de l'emploi, c'est de pouvoir aussi intégrer les partenaires comme l'environnement, l'UNESCO et la BAD, pour que, avec les partenaires que nous avons déjà dans le cadre de ce comité, Banque mondiale, PNUD, BIT, l'ONUDI, et l'AFD, nous puissions effectivement avoir l'accompagnement nécessaire de tous les partenaires à la réalisation de ces actions fortes-là, dans le cadre des engagements qu'on a pris, en ce qui concerne la Côte d'Ivoire. Donc, voilà un peu brièvement ce que je peux dire. On peut développer en dehors de la session au niveau des questions-réponses pour que pour ceux qui veulent avoir plus d'informations, on puisse partager l'expérience de la Côte d'Ivoire avec eux. Merci.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kauku. A very comprehensive response that you've shared with us. And thank you for really focusing on the detail behind those 2 questions, clearly outlining what those next steps are, but also speaking very clearly to the opportunities that we have at the disposal of Côte d'Ivoire and how we might unlock these. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in my process right now, I have Madame Diana to respond next, but it has been brought to my attention that I know that Dr. Murefu is chasing a meeting, but I know that Dr. Diana will get her response within the allocated time. So I'm confident that I'm going to go to you next, ma'am, before I go to Dr. Murefu. Now, what I would like to do, Madame Akonsia, is just pause on the realization, of course, and the acknowledgement that as part of the Green Deal and the EU-Africa partnership, we know that the EU stated that it would ensure that green alliances are a part of its relations with Africa and would partner with the region to really maximize the benefits of the green transition. The question that I'd like for you to just reflect on for us is, how is the EU working on this in the context of the new programming? So what does it look like? And maybe as a second part to the question, will attention be granted to that intersection between climate, environment, and decent work? Again, apologizing in advance for the shorter time, but knowing that you will do a great job of the question. Over to you, Madam.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, Madam, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. And first of all, thanks to the ILO for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to explain this very important part of the European policy. And I guarantee to you that I will be brief and to the point. So first of all, for the coming years, I can guarantee to you, and we are answering to the second part of your question, that the nexus between climate, environment, and decent work will be at the heart of the European Union cooperation with Africa. And I can talk for Ghana and West Africa, that are the region where I am, but it is certainly in general for all Africa. We are now in the final endorsement phase of the programming of the new instrument that will support the European Union external action, the Neighborhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument. It's called WICI. I'm sorry for this horrible acronym, but I couldn't find anything better. And we have started now the regional and countries programming to identify specific priorities for our partnership between 2021 and 2027. And the two key strategies that you mentioned in your question, the Green Deal and the EU-Africa partnership, put both of them, decent and green jobs, at the center of the EU action, combining sustainable investment, improving the business environment, boosting skills development and innovation. And it is exactly in that direction that we are moving forward with our new programming and the discussions with our partner countries. Tackling climate emergency, protecting the environment, and promoting decent work are critical to achieve the SDG. And our top priority is to develop an economy that works for the people and the planet, built on equality for all and on a green and just transition. And this is valid within Europe and in our external action. So definitely our actions are totally aligned with the Climate Action for Job initiative, and we share the same ambitions to contribute to the relevant UNFCCC processes while addressing the imperatives of the creation of decent work and a just transition for all. We believe that greening production and consumption patterns and promoting green jobs, climate action, not only has an impact on labor markets, job quality and health and safety at the workplace, but also foster innovation and productivity and enhances opportunity for growth. So specifically for the West Africa region, we have clearly, and we've heard also from the former speakers, a mutual interest to boost sustainable and green growth by attracting private sustainable investment and enhancing the business climate and creating quality jobs. This has been one of our priorities throughout our past cooperation cycle and remains a priority, and it is even more for our future cooperation. Now to come to the practical example of Ghana and how we are trying to put these ambitious objectives into practice. In designing our future program, we are focusing on green and inclusive growth. That will include circular economy, climate-smart agriculture, agribusiness, and natural resources management. We plan to support businesses directly with innovative financial instruments and to provide skills training to improve the youth opportunities to benefit from these new technologies. So we see skills training as the necessary accompanying measure to all the innovative cooperation that we're trying to put in place. Another intervention area will be sustainable cities and urban governance. We will work together with the EU development banks to provide green and resilient infrastructure, and digitalization will be a priority throughout our action. In summary, we propose an integrated and transformative approach which would contribute to the government's transformation agenda and post-COVID recovery. And this will build, of course, on our present and already very robust portfolio of projects aimed at creating green jobs, supporting the creation of sustainable businesses. I just want to make an example to make it more concrete. A few weeks ago, we launched projects to create jobs in some communities around the capital city, Accra, in the specific field of circular economy. So again, job creation, green, always together. As a final example of the EU actions to strengthen the linkages between environment, decent jobs and trade, I am eager to mention the EU multi-stakeholder dialogue on sustainable cocoa that has a clear focus on social, environmental, and economic sustainability, and the Trade for Decent Job project funded by EU and implemented by the ILO in Ghana. So these were a few examples to give a flavor of what we do concretely to promote the just ecological transition. And last but not least, we look with high interest at Ghana's effort to develop the national green job strategy. And we are glad to support its finalization, as we believe that this can be a key document to guide the country in its economic transformation process that should bring it to a stable middle-income country status. So I close here, and just to say, I look forward to continue the cooperation with partner countries, the social partner, and international organization to implement this strategic agenda together. Thank you very much. And I hope I was short enough as requested.
Thank you very much, Madame Makosia. Again, a great deal packed in a short amount of time. We appreciate the very practical nature that you brought into the conversation, really unlocking some real examples for us to engage with and grapple with. At this point, as I make my way to Dr. Israel Murefu, I do want to ask our audience if you could continue to bear with us for just a quarter of an hour as we are running over the allocated time. But you have my word that a quarter of an hour is all that we're going to need. Allow me then to go to Dr. Israel Murefu. Dr. Murefu, let's go to Zimbabwe, right, where we know that the country engaged
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. We know that the country was engaged in a 2020 Green Jobs Assessment, and that this was done to support improvements of the National Climate Plan, or also what we have been referring to as the Nationally Determined Contributions, the NDCs, in this conversation. The question to you, sir, is what would be useful support, in your view, to enable businesses to contribute to a just transition, especially businesses that are run by young leaders? Your thoughts on this, sir, please. Dr. Murefu, you are welcome to take the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and all protocol observed. I think the Zimbabwean scenario is such that industry and businesses were not positioned in terms of their establishment. They were not positioned to deal with climate change issues or environment issues. And therefore, what is required is quite a big mind shift and also a big policy shift in terms of moving to address environmental issues. Whilst social or environmental issues have become topical within our environment, I think what is lacking is the support and the investment around establishing businesses that are inclined towards promoting a better environment. The major areas where we have got big businesses are mining and manufacturing. And most of these businesses, like I said, were not designed to deal with climate issues. But I think it has become important that they begin to address climate and environment issues. And I think this has now become an issue in our boardrooms. Issues of environmental social governance have become topical in our boardrooms. And I think areas that need to be addressed in terms of providing support are, first of all, the area of investment. We need investment to promote green enterprises. For example, most of our businesses, particularly those that are listed on the stock exchange, are owned by pension funds. And I think pension funds can play a significant role in terms of influencing investment around green enterprises, because they are the ones which have got the financial muscle to put in investment, to put in money in companies that promote good environmental management, and also that promote the creation of green enterprises. So I think if investment can be directed at those companies, or creating companies that have an orientation towards creating green enterprises, creating green businesses through, for example, the stock market, I think we can realize some significant change in terms of businesses moving towards establishment of green enterprises. We also need, I think, financial support in terms of banks and financial institutions lending to companies that promote green enterprises, that promote a proper management of the environment. And I think at governmental level, it is important to put policies that promote the extension of credit to those companies that can clearly show that they have an environmental and social governance policy or framework which promotes the establishment of green enterprises, which promotes good environmental management. And it is also important to promote the consumption of green products and services, and develop markets and create demand for the same, so that these businesses have got a market where they can dispose of their products. If there is no market or demand for these products, it becomes very difficult to promote those businesses. I think we also need to provide vocational training skills, where there will be linkages between vocational training colleges and organizations, so that the development of green skills is promoted, and that skills which are necessary, for example, in areas like your solar energy, your hydro energy, and other renewable forms of energy are important, because these are the skills that are required to promote those enterprises that are whose objectives, among other things, is to promote good environmental management and good climate management. We also, I think, need to promote.
Can I encourage you, Dr. Moreira, to begin to wrap up? May I encourage you just to complete your final point, please, sir, as we are quite tight on time. Please go ahead as you wrap up your thought.
Okay, so as businesses, I think there is much that is required in terms of readiness and support and capacity building to evolve the current structure of business and process and systems and align them to the green agenda. There is investment needed by way of readiness and capacity building support to deliberately conscientize the business environment of the impact of their businesses and services or products to the environment, and gradually lobby for change in business methodologies and approaches towards operational greening. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Morefu. And again, some really, really powerful insights you've lifted. You've spoken about credit extension and development finance institutions and banks generally coming to the party. You've spoken about revisiting the pension funds and asking whether we should be looking at how they can influence investment. And of course, the call to action for businesses to really think about their operating models and their underlying structures to move us in the right direction. With great appreciation for your contribution, Dr. Morefu. Allow me then to go back to you, Professor Nyong, and I'm going to take a little bit of a historical step back as I position the question for you. If we recall, on the 6th of April, African and other global leaders committed to prioritizing actions that will help African countries to adapt to the impact of climate change and to build forward better. Now, we also know that the African Development Bank committed to increase its climate finance and to use it to leverage additional funds to really then accelerate climate change adaptation. Very similar to what we heard Dr. Morefu speaking about now or calling on. So the question to you, Professor Nyong, is this: how do you see the just transition and decent work dimensions feature within the context of multilateral development banks? And more importantly, how could multilateral development banks or DFIs in general support a just transition in Africa? It's a big question, and I'm calling on a concise answer. Over to you, Prof.
Yeah, thank you so very much, moderator. Thanks to the ILO for inviting us to be here. But let me start by saying that a just transition is not just about mitigation. It is also about transformational adaptation. When you look at what happens at the global space, over 90% of the climate resources go to mitigation, and just about 10% or less goes to adaptation, which should not be the case. Africa, for instance, is a very minor player. When you put together 55 or 54 African countries, the way you may look at it, you see that we contribute less than 5% of the emissions, but we bear a disproportionately high brunt of the adverse impacts. But we focus so much on the mitigation phase, and we lose out on what is important to us. We've heard people talk about stranded assets, but I'm telling you that without adaptation, we're going to be having stranded workers. We're going to be having stranded communities completely. So for us, adaptation becomes very important. And current efforts also on creating green jobs have also done the same thing, skewed more towards mitigation, particularly jobs in the energy sector. This is not really where we're playing at. Our emissions largely come from agriculture, poor land use practices, deforestation, and so on. How do we ensure that the 600,000 deaths of our young women and girls every year, from indoor pollution, trying to cook decent meals for their families, how do we avoid that? Because these people going into the forest to take firewood, burn charcoal, and this is where we are contributing to emissions. So when people talk about energy, I say, well, you can keep focusing on it, but if you put people at the center of the just transition, you realize that, one, we need to be able to stop that unnecessary debt that is coming in. Adaptation and resilience building, the actions here provide numerous opportunities for the creation of decent work and job, ranging from building back better programs after climate shocks, to the reconstruction of infrastructure designed to enhance adaptation and resilience of communities, such as coastal defenses and floods. We're also hearing, and seeing an increase in nature-based solutions as growing in importance as part of adaptation and resilience. So we realize that there are job opportunities there. So this program you've mentioned, the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program that we launched on the 6th of April, basically focuses on job creation for youths. And one of the things it does is that, it provides opportunities for us to create and sustain jobs on the African continent. we aim to strengthen the productivity and growth of 10,000 youth-led SMEs and increase climate resilience and enhance job opportunities. And then we also intend to mobilize about $3 billion to support African youth. Youths say they are not the future, they are the present. There are opportunities in the fourth industrial revolution. We are seeing young men and women who are being taken now back into agriculture, where they can deploy the fourth industrial revolution, where they are sitting on Internet of Things, where they are using laptops, digital climate information services, satellite imageries to plan and do their farming. So we are creating opportunities for this. MDBs, we have a very important role. I'm rounding up now. We have a very important role to play in this. But one thing I want to keep emphasizing, there is no one size fits all formula for a just transition. When people speak of just transition, they should recognize where each of us is. We are not on the same pedestal, we are not at the same place, and we are not heading to the same direction at the same time. African countries and other developing countries have been given a leeway to get into that space in the second half of the century. It's a transition. It's not something that binary, yes or no, you switch or you don't switch. It's a transition. Let's take that into consideration. If not, we will be doing more harm to our communities than we actually ought to be doing. Thank you.
Professor Nyong, you've said stranded communities and stranded workers, certainly not a future that we want to create, but also the invitation to go into the nuance and the context of each country, understanding that we are at different places, and so we need to find each other as we begin to walk together. Thank you very much for also lifting the importance of adaptation and not just mitigation, which oftentimes is the emphasis in these conversations. Mr. Babakar Silla, it's been a long time coming to you with this question, but looking forward to your participation now. Here's the question to you, sir. So Senegal has embarked on some major infrastructure projects. We've seen the TR, the BRT, oil and gas exploration happening. The question that I'd like to bring to you is, what strategies do the unions intend to develop to achieve a just transition with real benefits for workers? I'd love to hear your thoughts here in as a concise way as possible. Mr. Silla, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la modératrice. J'aimerais d'emblée remercier au nom du camarade secrétaire général Moudi Guiro, remercier le BIT d'avoir initié ces réflexions et d'y avoir associé le gouvernement sénégalais. Pour répondre à votre question, permettez-moi de préciser tout d'abord que la transition juste est un concept certes global, mais dont la mise en œuvre est à contextualiser. On peut dès lors comprendre que le modus operandi ne peut être identique ni dans toutes les régions du monde, encore moins dans tous les pays. Pour le contexte sénégalais précisément, les syndicats partent d'un principe préalable et qui demeure l'un des principes directeurs d'une transition juste, à savoir le dialogue social. Parce qu'on admet que rien ne peut s'accomplir de manière efficace en dehors d'une démarche inclusive, coordonnée et largement partagée. Donc, disons qu'à côté de l'unité syndicale, l'unité d'action syndicale qui est matérialisée par la coalition des centrales syndicales affiliées à la CSI et du tripartisme qui est matérialisé par le Haut Conseil du dialogue social, la CNTS a initié une autre démarche, c'est-à-dire s'ouvrir à d'autres acteurs d'autres acteurs non syndicaux, non étatiques, c'est-à-dire les organisations de la société civile. Et c'est en ce sens qu'un groupe de travail a été mis sur pied, un groupe d'action et de réflexion sur le climat avec l'appui de la Fondation Frédéric Ebert. Et au sein de ce groupe, ce qu'on essaie de faire, c'est de prioriser les préoccupations syndicales. Et pour actualiser toutes ces opportunités pour une transition juste réussie au Sénégal, on peut partir de deux stratégies. D'abord, les initiatives syndicales, des initiatives qui sont prises par les organisations syndicales elles-mêmes et qui sont généralement tournées vers la formalisation de l'économie informelle. Aujourd'hui, la CNTS a fini de mettre des questions comme le genre et le climat au cœur de ses politiques, du fait de leur caractère transversal, ces deux questions-là, le genre et le climat. On peut également s'appuyer sur des programmes et projets de l'État. Et parmi ces programmes et projets, vous l'avez évoqué, le Sénégal s'est lancé dans de très grands projets. On peut, par exemple, prendre l'exemple du transport. Avec la modernisation du secteur du transport, on a l'introduction du BRT, le bus rapide transit et du TR, le train express régional. En tant que syndicat, ce que nous devons faire, c'est de nous positionner dès la phase réalisation de ces projets-là. Parce qu'il faut le dire, ces projets génèrent des emplois, mais en suppriment également. Donc, dans la composante PAP, les personnes affectées par le projet, on a des acteurs économiques, généralement des acteurs qui sont dans le secteur informel. Il revient aux syndicats de se mettre à côté de ces acteurs-là pour pouvoir réussir leur reconversion ou bien leur insertion dans le tissu économique. Dans la phase fonctionnement également, que les travailleurs qui étaient déjà dans l'ancien tissu que constitue le petit train de banlieue et les lignes de station, et y compris certaines stations et certaines lignes de bus qui seront supprimées, que ces travailleurs-là puissent avoir également un point de chute. Et pour terminer également dans ce secteur, il faut surtout relever le défi de la formation et du développement des compétences à travers le transfert des technologies. Deuxième secteur prioritaire, le secteur de l'énergie. Le Sénégal, dans sa contribution déterminée au niveau national, s'est résolu d'atteindre 40,7% de la production globale en énergie propre à partir de 2035. Et de manière concrète, nous avons la réalisation de parcs éoliens et de centrales solaires. Donc là aussi se pose le défi de la syndicalisation, mais surtout de l'adoption de textes qui prendront en compte les préoccupations des syndicats. Et dernier secteur qu'on a identifié, c'est l'exploitation du pétrole et du gaz. Et là, on s'est dit que le défi majeur des syndicats, c'est de parvenir à asseoir un développement économique à côté d'une durabilité environnementale. Et on a heureusement déjà, avec l'appui du partenariat pour l'action sur l'économie verte, le PAGE, un document qui est conçu pour les fonds et mécanismes de gestion des revenus pétroliers et gaziers à l'appui du développement durable. On a également une loi sur le contenu local. Et enfin, on est en train également de porter des plaidoyers en faveur des acteurs de la pêche pour que les externalités négatives que l'exploitation de ces ressources pétrolières et gazières en offshore surtout ne pourra surtout pas tuer le secteur de la pêche. Voilà, de manière très ramassée, les quelques points, en tout cas les quelques stratégies qui sont à la portée des organisations syndicales et qu'on pourrait actualiser pour réussir une transition juste et solidaire au niveau national. Merci.
Merci, Mr. Silla. Thank you very much for that response. And again, really lifting some of the opportunities there in terms of what social dialogue done right can achieve. And a massive thank you to you. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I just would like to thank my panelists in the same conversation as we're looking at how we might unlock those opportunities for a just transition in Africa. A big thank you to Mr. Kauko, of course, who is the permanent secretary there in Nigeria. A thank you to Madame Akonsia, to Professor Nyong, a thank you to Dr. Murefu, as well as Mr. Silla, who has just closed us off. A final opportunity for me before I call on the RD, just to share some concluding remarks, is just to tap into the global conversation there one more time. As you're seeing it on your screen, I'm going to ask my colleagues to show that again, so that we might just see the kind of conversation that we've got going in the global space. Thank you very much. Let's make that a little bit bigger. That is fantastic. So we're seeing a great picture of our minister, of course, from Ghana, as he shares his commitments to the just transition. If we are looking at, of course, at the top of the screen, ILO Africa tweeting here, saying the future is in Africa. And this is, of course, a quote by the SG of the IOE, Mr. Roberto Suarez Santos, just sharing that with us today. He said, we really believe that the future is and should be in Africa. We really believe that the future is green. There is an urgent need to act now. What a beautiful way of closing off the conversation. And really seeing the message there, of course, also from Madame Anousheh Kaval, who sits on the board of the Climate Action for Jobs, that is really putting forward her thoughts there. Maybe a final word. Africa has all the elements to win the battle against climate change. Hashtag ILO Green Week. My invitation to you as I call on the RG is let's keep this conversation going. You can also follow me at The Real Nosy, where we are constantly talking about the issues that the ILO is bringing onto the fore. With that, ladies and gentlemen, taking to the floor as our final speaker for her concluding remarks today is the Regional Director and the Assistant Director General to the ILO. Madame, the floor is yours. If I might just call again, oh, there we go. So you're unmuted now. Madame, if we could just now try to get your camera on, that would be fantastic.
Thank you very much. I'd like to get my camera on as well. So I'd like to be enabled. So first, let me thank you so very much, Nozipo, for the great moderation as usual. You have literally become an honorable member of the ILO family, particularly the ILO family in Africa. Let me thank you, honorable ministers, all the representatives of governments, the PSs, the DGs, the representatives of employers and workers organizations, and representatives of development partners. I particularly thank the representative from France, Madame Kavar, the EU representative, and of course, our partner, the African Development Bank, who is also my brother, Professor Nyong. Thank you so much for all of you. This has been a very rich session. There's been quite a lot of very, very useful information that has been put on the table. We will definitely be taking this up with you, both at the continental level and at the level of countries. It's important that we all have agreed, every single person who has taken the floor, and even those who have made their contributions have realized the importance of having a just transition for a sustainable future of work in Africa. And it's well understood that this is a multifaceted issue. It's a context-specific issue, and this was stressed by Professor Nyong in his intervention. But what has come out is that this is achievable. As one of the panelists said, we don't have the luxury of time. We have to work at the pace that will enable us maximize the opportunities and address the challenges in the continent of Africa. It's also very, very well indicated that we need clear and comprehensive policy frameworks. The centrality of having social dialogue, of having consensus, was underscored by virtually everybody. And this is one of the things that we bring to the table to facilitate the needed transformation. The importance of investing in skills and research. The professor from South Africa emphasized the need for policy relevant research, for engagement that will influence policies, and the need to work together. These are clear issues that have been articulated, and these are issues that are already fully integrated into the programs that the ILO is supporting countries with. One of the key things that came out, and I really want to give a shout out to IOE and ITUC for bringing this out, is that we must not leave anybody behind. Social protection is key, but more than that, or in addition to that, considering that Africa is largely informal, 4 out of every 5 jobs in the continent is in the informal economy, we have to address this and we have to integrate this into our engagement. Last but not the least, nobody can do this alone. there has to be partnerships at the national level through social dialogue, but also intersectoral partnerships. The PS from Nigeria talked about the need for the ministries of labor to reach out to other ministries, including those responsible for the environment. These are key issues, but also partnerships at the global level. The different institutions have to work together. We're glad that the EU emphasized the need for partnership. Madame Kava emphasized the need for others to come to the table in addition to what we're doing with France, but there's also the need for us to engage with development finance institutions, particularly those who have a regional mandate like the African Development Bank. So reiterating the calls that have been made for us to work together, the ILO is ready. We're already using the resources that we have to make a difference. But when we all put our hands together, we're able to move even that much further. Let me end by thanking everybody again for your full participation, your engagement, the ownership of this program, the commitment. We have in this group, the coalition of the willing. And I want to thank the colleagues from my team. This has been a very, very hectic work, bringing all the partners together. You've done an amazing job. Kudos to you. Thank you for those in the regional office, those in headquarters, and all our partners. Let me end by thanking the interpreters and calling on all of us to be safe and to remain green, and ensure that we have a human-centered approach to all our interventions. Once again, thank you very much, Nosipo Shabalala. And with this, I say good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, depending on where you are. And please keep safe. Merci, au revoir, bye.